Okay, it's my great pleasure to welcome you here today to this one of our first discussions on voter apathy, and specifically this one on understanding the undecided voter in Jamaica. Today, the link between sustainable development and democracy is well established and well articulated from the works of Sen 1999's book Development as Freedom across several human development reports that started in the 1990s. Even Lewis articulated the importance of participation and its impact on economic development. We've all recognized how important it is that political apathy is something that we address. In all these texts and publications, political apathy has been identified as a variable that weakens democracy. Simply put, when fewer people are engaged, decisions may no longer reflect the true needs of a society. This makes the uncommitted voter a critical subject of inquiry, as understanding their motivations, their hesitations, and conditions for their engagement is essential for strengthening democracy and democratic participation. This means then profiling the uncommitted voter is not merely a statistical or academic exercise, but rather a strategic imperative for revitalizing democracy and reversing the tide of civic disengagement which we all witnessed in the last general elections. And we're all here today for that particular concern. And SALISES has championed such causes historically, causes specifically as it relates to enhancing development in the Caribbean. And this particular threat to democracy for us represents a threat to the Vision 2030 project. Our interest and curiosity and our continuation of this particular work is something that SALISES has been doing for years, not just today. Sustainable development, social and economic development have both been critical areas of research for SALISES. And earlier I was speaking to Senator Bunting about several of the scholars. I think he remembered one that dated me, so I don't think we're going to be having that discussion. I had to remind him, Senator, that I'm just 50. I'm still young, So I didn't remember Sir Alistair McIntyre's stint here as one of the research fellows. But I worked with Norman Girvan for a while, and his work was very foundational for my own dissertation. As a matter of fact, his thesis actually formed the theoretical framework for my thesis for my dissertation. But I can definitely say today that SALISES is still doing this kind of research. We're still dedicated to the region. We're still doing innovative and cutting edge research. We're still thought leaders. We still transform our research into meaningful output, whether this is policy or community development and empowerment. I'm going to kindly ask the current fellows at SALISES who are here. I see Dacia here. I see, please stand. Please just stand and identify yourselves. So this is the future of SALISES. Researchers that are doing research ranging from ICT for development, community development and empowerment, crime and justice management, diaspora management, gender empowerment, community empowerment, grassroots empowerment, as well as even blockchain and cybersecurity and cryptocurrency research. This is the kind of research that SALISES is doing in terms of cutting edge research. This particular study, thank you very much, colleagues. This particular study was undertaken by myself and Dr. Johnson, who both have been doing a number of research projects in the last 10 years. And we've noticed the growing number of persons who identify as the uncommitted. And it has always been a curiosity and a concern for us. And we've always wanted to do some research project in this regard. And we were able to do a large project that could capture this particular area of interest. And the challenge is real, because in the last 4 decades, voter turnout in Jamaica has dwindled from 86% in the 1980s to 38% in the last general election. So this just goes to show you how challenging this particular problem was. So for this study, we actually did a sample of 2,800 participants between September 1 and December 1. The large sample size was primarily for a big study. And the big study was on political ideology. We wanted to map the political ideology of Jamaicans and the different demographics of Jamaicans in terms of mapping the political ideology. We have that data, and we plan to do an interesting study on that. That's very, very interesting in terms of looking and knowing who we are and where we are ideologically. But from that study, we were able to get 37% of the population, 38% of the population at that time, who said that they were not going to vote. So we decided to do another study. We took that data set and we did another study between February 1 and May 1, where we specifically sought out persons who didn't vote in the last general elections and said that they were not going to vote in this particular election. So we had a total sample size in this regard of 1,065 of just those persons who would consider themselves to be the undecided. And that's 100% of that data set. Plus we had the 38, I think it's 38% from the previous data set that we had. And we also did several focus group discussions prior to the second survey, and we've been doing several focus group discussions since, trying to see if we can narrow down who the undecided voter is. In our minds, once we can identify who these people are, we could work with the political parties, civil society, and the media to get more persons involved in the democratic process by participating in the electoral ritual itself. So we're very happy that we did this study, and it's this conversation today. It's not televised yet. We are treating it as a consultation, so to speak, from which we're going to generate and finalize the report. But we are very interested in knowing what your insights are, and we specifically invited persons who we thought were key stakeholders in this particular journey that we're on to try to see how best to strengthen democracy towards enhancing the sustainable development of Jamaica and realizing Vision 2030. So thank you very much for coming, and I'm going to kindly ask the Dean, Dr. Heather Ricketts, to just welcome us to her faculty. We are encroaching on her space, and I'm going to kindly ask her to come here. Heather. Thank you. Hold on, let me clap myself.
I can tell you that there is no encroachment. I am, however, tempted to say all protocol observed, but I will not do so. I think it's important for me to acknowledge some very distinguished persons in our midst. And so, Professor Waller, I acknowledge you and I thank you for your invitation to bring greetings. Senators Golding Campbell and Bunting, welcome. I see distinguished Professor Trevor Monroe. I believe I also see Jeanette Calder of JAMP in the audience, and all my other colleague members of the Academy, the Stephen Johnson, Nicola Satchel, Damian Gordon, Professor Donna Hope, all the SALISES research fellows. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. And I have to welcome you very warmly to the Mona campus, and specifically the Faculty of Social Sciences and the SALISES, to what I consider to be a forum, well, we've been told, to share the findings of a study on political apathy in Jamaica, and also to engage in a solution-oriented discussion. And that's very important for me, the solutions. And I want to thank again Professor Waller for his invitation for me to bring these few remarks. I would say that today's forum is welcome and timely. We actually have a general election on our doorsteps, but more so because, as we all know, we are dealing with what is a global phenomenon, the waning of interest in politics and also in voting. From all the studies about this, we understand that it can have a deleterious impact on democracy. And Professor Waller just shared some of this with us. Most worrying, however, is that when we examine this issue by age groups, we find that some of the highest levels of voter apathy are among our young people. Expressions such as can't bother, not interested, life is not going to improve, my vote wouldn't mean a difference, you only see them when they want your vote, after you vote, you don't see them. Those are really very concerning, but they are the realities for the people who express these views. And it begs the question, if we continue like this, who will be the contenders for leadership in the next few decades? Not just in terms of numbers, but also in terms of quality. And perhaps another question, what implications will there be for state capacity? I read in a University of Nottingham Institute for Policy and Engagement blog, and this blog was written by Dr. Christopher Pitch, who is an associate professor in marketing at the university's business school. The blog is titled, Is Political Apathy Threatening Democracy? Why People Don't Vote and What Can Be Done About It? And he argues that, and I'm quoting him, if voter disengagement continues to rise, it poses a direct threat to the integrity of elections and electoral democracy, the stability of governance of states, as well as empowering disruptive narratives that speak to people who feel underrepresented, end quote. Additionally, there's the issue of vote buying, which for me is a very dangerous practice. The checks and balances provided by political engagement ensure the protection of the democratic process and ultimately that democracy prevails. You know, I come from Grenada and I grew up in an environment of political violence leading to the overthrow of an administration and sadly the implosion of the liberating political administration, which itself had become repressive. Too much blood was shed by too many in the fight for universal adult suffrage, and so we have a duty, really, as citizens to engage in the democratic process. I was noting in an exclusive interview with the Jamaica Observer in April 2024, on the heels of the local government elections, in which just about 30% of the electorate voted, former Prime Minister Patterson lamented as follows: it must be of concern when we see declining voter turnout. It should be something of concern to both major political parties and indeed to the entire country, because we are failing to convert into actual meaning something, and which is universal adult suffrage, that is so fundamental to our progress as a country, end quote. There's a lot of distrust, mistrust even, and disillusionment, which fuel this level of voter apathy. And as a sociologist, these levels of disengagement spell trouble for social cohesion, which is critical for community and societal stability, growth, and development. So I must congratulate SALISES for embarking on this important examination of political apathy, and they're doing so in collaboration or in partnership with Behavioral Dynamic Solutions. And I congratulate them for seeking to go beyond just understanding the issue, but also for examining the consequences and exploring and proposing mitigating strategies aimed at rebuilding trust and engagement and participation. Importantly, this is a longitudinal study. Prof. Waller, you didn't necessarily say so, but I was reading that it's a longitudinal study. And we don't have many longitudinal studies in the region. And so this is another, I would say, feather in the cap of SALISES. And this longitudinal study spans 2024 to 2027, and it employs a mixed methods approach. Another great choice of, I would say, methodological, of methodology, involving surveys, focus group discussions, and stakeholder interviews, as you said. This seminar proves yet again the UWI's active and responsive stance in responding to the needs of the Caribbean community and society. And we certainly understand our duty as a public university that we must help with solutions to real problems that we face as a region. So I look forward, as I close, to the outcome of today's forum and ultimately to the project. And thank again Professor Waller and the SALISES team for seeking to address this important issue. We trust that the results will help to guide policymakers and that the corrective actions will positively impact engagement, which we know to be highly correlated with development outcomes. So as we discuss the likely strategies to combat growing voter apathy, I want to share the following recommendation, again from Professor Rich, who I quoted from Nottingham Business School. Quote, that policymakers, strategists, and researchers should not prioritize disengaged voters and forget to continue to reach out to engaged voters. Otherwise, the strategies and initiatives introduced to appeal to disengaged voters may be counterintuitive, particularly if engaged voters become disengaged in the future, which would have an adverse impact on voter turnout in future elections, end quote. So, thank you all once again for your attendance, and we look forward to your participation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean. So now we have the main presentation. So Dean, just to let you know, you spoke earlier about who buys votes. We actually were able to map that as well. We can tell you the demographics of the vote buyers. But that's not for today. That's for another time. So we've been doing a number of studies, to be quite frank, in the last 4 years. None of which has come to light. Generally speaking, when we get a survey to do, depending on who we're working with, we would throw 1 or 2 questions on the questionnaire and piggyback. So, we do research ourselves and we trust only our data. And we were getting a lot of data from blue people over here and market people over there. So we needed to get our own data, not to be shared, but we have been collecting data. So we literally have 15 data sets of polling data collected between 2020 and 2025. So we dumped it into an AI for predictive analysis. So, but that's a conversation for another day. Afterwards, we are allowing the ecosystem to occur naturally without any form of interference whatsoever from it, because we are observers and we like to observe how things happen. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Johnson. Dr. Johnson, I met Dr. Johnson in, I don't remember when, probably 2025 or 2026. He was doing a degree in international, 2005, 2006, 2006. He was doing a first degree in, in IR, and I think he wanted to do his law degree, and we kind of quietly talked him out of it. He has thanked us since then. So he did his master's in government and he did his PhD overseas as well. And he's in SALISES. And when I was in government, I was trying to get Stephen back to government. And, he was in SALISES. And now that I'm in SALISES, I have to tell government, okay, we're okay. He doesn't need to go anywhere right here now, because, he's a data person and we love data persons. Because they're very difficult to come by. Not everybody loves data, and Stephen loves to play with data. Loves to play with data, even more so than me. So without further ado, Dr. Johnson, the spotlight, the table, the bullseye is yours. I must admit that I participated in the study as much as him. So anybody to blame me as well.
Thank you very much. Greetings, everyone. I am going to have to follow the example of my dean, as much as I am tempted to say all protocols observed. Senator Golden, Senator Bunting, Professors Donna Hope, Trevor Monroe, opposition spokesperson and public information, Nikisha Burchell. Uh, Welcome, my colleagues from SALISES, fellow panelists. Thank you for coming. Now, it's surreal because this study was actually planned in 2020, the day after the election, and I called Prof from the UK and say, look, when you look, most persons were saying, oh, it's because of COVID why we had a low voter turnout. And I made the case to him that if we really look at the data, we really see that there's a trajectory, there's a path, there's a pattern that started from as early as 1989. And it's now feeding into where we are now. Now, in terms of to provide an overview of what I'm going to do today, so identify the issue of minority rule briefly, to provide a profile of the undecided voters, identify and rank issues of importance to the undecided voters, provide an ideological map of Jamaican voters. I think it's the first of its kind here. It's an ambitious attempt, and to understand the electorate's demand. Now, let's start here with the most recent poll. Now, there's a strong possibility that the 2025 election could be decided by the undecided. Now, as you can see, the opposition has regressed somewhat in the polls. And most of the voters who have changed their minds, they have gone back over to the undecided column. The JLP has remained stagnant in its support. In terms of going forward, it is going to need the support of the undecided. So right now, the prize position, yes, to keep your base, but to woo the undecided. So they are very important in this election, right? So where we're coming from in terms of the issue, as you can see, starting in 1989, we're coming from a high of 78%. Now, there was an uptick in 2007 when there was some sort of welfareism, which we're going to make a case about. There was free education and free healthcare, so there was a bump. So this served as a stimuli for voters, and more of them came out. But since then, continue back on the same path of a downward trajectory, right? Now, of significance here in 2020, well, we started in 2016. We went below the 50%. Now, democracy is about majority rule. And once you go below 50%, is the minority making the decision of the government, right? And then we went even further. And we went to 37%. And there's a possibility that we could go further than the 37%. Now, working with the principle of majority rule, which dictates that decisions should be made based on the preference of more than half of your voting members. Now, voters are rational creatures. And when you have 37%, it's simply saying that enough is not being done by both political parties to stimulate the rational creatures. So we end up with one of the lowest, no, the lowest in the English-speaking Caribbean. Now the Barbados has gone below 50% in their last election. So we have the lowest voter turnout across the English-speaking Caribbean. And of course, that's more than cause for concern, right? So when we feed that into the whole principle of majority rule, we realize that whereas other aspects of our democracy is strong, a key component, which is voter participation, is weak and is heading to almost non-existent, and I'm not exaggerating, right? So both presenters before me, they made the case of why we cannot continue with minority rule. Now this now brings our attention that political parties are not able to stimulate or engage our voters. And we must do something about it. And what we're doing about it is to find out why. So this study was all about the undecided. Yes, there are voters who might look at them, but it's all about what is it that the undecided want? What would bring them to the table, right? So we're working with the principle of rationality. Voters, as I said, are rational creatures. There are several things that could stimulate them. Issues, policy, emotion, candidate image, current events, personal events, etc., etc. Now, in terms of a profile, who is the undecided? Well, universally, this is the case. It's usually younger voters because they're at a stage in life where things like tax breaks and mortgage, it doesn't really stimulate them at this stage, right? So that wasn't this is not unexpected. We have millennials, and notably higher among younger cohorts overall, right? Talk about gender, residents. So we have predominantly rural-based persons. They don't tend to vote. We talk about economic status. Mostly persons earning between 14 to 79,000 monthly. In terms of housing stability, generally stable and approximately half owning their house outright, but notably, 38% stated that they are not homeowners, right? We're gonna get to that. In terms of employment status, predominantly employed in unskilled labor are facing unemployment. Now, the crux of it is what matters to the undecided. Now, as you will see, we have a welfare state as we have mapped it, but just look at the individual items. The greatest support is for the continuation of free hospital care. Importance of the social safety net, which is part. Then we have the issue of corruption. Then we have the issue of the need for a livable wage, having access, but this one jumped out at me, having access to quality teachers. At first, when it emerged in the focus group, we were like, nah, and then persons started to speak about it and they started to give their reason as to our children, education seems like a pathway out, but our children do not have access to quality teachers. And they start to describe it and they tell you what is a good school from a bad school, or we don't want to send our child to this school because this teacher has a track record of doing X, right? Of course, high on the list is the legalization of ganja, which we seem to be stuck here. Again, in terms of welfareism, providing free school uniforms, exempting earners who are earning less than 3 million, harsher punishment, right to freely express dissent. And of course, we have some on the list in terms of media, use of Zozo in terms of support. So we have a distinction in terms of those who are leaning towards the JLP and those who are leaning towards the PMP, and then those who are not leaning to either party when you look at it, but it's almost similar across the board. Now, we may also made an attempt in order to better understand our voters to develop an ideological map. And traditionally, how it is studied, we're asking a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, are you left or right, which is confusing. So we actually came up with 20 questions, 5 for each of the quadrant. And then afterwards, we do our calculation and see where the different pockets of voters would be positioned. Now, as you can see here, every single aspect of Jamaica's population, be it based on age, political affiliation, or being non-committed, were on the left. This was shocking for me, because I expected that you always hear that those who support the JLP, they would be more inclined to be on the right. No. This right here represents a demand for welfareism across voters, non-voters, young, old, everybody. They want a welfare state. But what is interesting is there was also limited support for taxation. And as you know, you cannot have welfareism without taxation. So that for me was the dilemma in terms of it's going to form the core of the question to ask political parties. How do you address this? How do you provide welfareism without taxing personnel, or when you have quite a significant portion of your labor force that is informal? So how do you cover that gap? Right? But despite being on the left, there are subtle distinction between them. As you can see, JLP supporters, they're more inclined for law and order. For those at the PMP, they're more liberal, right? And those that fall in between. Now, for the undecided, they don't feel represented by either group, and not surprisingly, they're smacked in the middle, right? So they don't believe in the PMP's progressivism or JLP's centrism, right? They're about pro-welfare, like most everybody else. But Gen Zers, very left economically, very liberal. So they are pro-redistribution of wealth. Progressive and identity politics like climate change. And just to give you a sense of party affiliation. In terms of the PMP, they are the furthest left and liberal, deepest in the quadrant. They believe in social democracy, public ownership, and anti-austerity, but they support for social justice reform. For the JLP, they're more pragmatic and welfare policies, but friendlier to business and the private sector. All right? The overall population, left-leaning. The unique scenarios I established before is the people want welfare. However, they are all hesitant to be taxed. How do we get them off the ledge? Right? Now, to focus on what they want and to hear the party's response, or to put it out there for the parties to come up with plans or policies on how to get these persons off the fence. Now, this is what the people want. Continuation of free healthcare. And the question beside that we're asking on their behalf is, how will we guarantee sustainable funding for free hospital care while improving quality and reducing wait times? In terms of importance of social safety nets, what are the plans for PATH going forward? Are we going to remain the same? Are we going to expand it? In terms of corruption, it's a serious problem. What credible, transparent actions will be taken to show zero tolerance for corruption within our party and government? Access to schools with quality teachers. I think both parties are silent here. What reforms or incentives are needed to attract, train, and retain quality teachers in underserved communities? In terms of providing free school uniforms, how will we fund and sustain a universal free uniform program towards those most in need? In terms of legalization of ganja, how will we ensure equitable access to licensing and prevent large corporations from dominating a legal ganja industry? Exempting earners who are earning less than 3 million from income tax. What fiscal trade-offs are we willing to make to deliver meaningful tax relief? In terms of harsher punishments, are harsher penalties sufficient, or do we need to invest more in prevention, education, and judicial reform? I'm not sure what to say about this or the question to ask. The right to freely express dissent without fear. I didn't know that this exists here, but it's a predominant issue that emerged. Now, providing free childcare for employed persons. And this is something I'm very well interested in, because we have a declining population rate. For the first time, it went below, I think, 2%. But at the same time, we are promoting and we are calling for persons to, have a family or start a family. But what provisions are being made? We reminded, we have a great demand here for a welfare state. So what is being done, and notice we specifically say for employed persons, for persons who are actually contributing to the tax system already. What provisions can be made for them to start a family? What incentives? And access to housing as a social right. What specific housing solutions can we roll out within the next fiscal year? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the demand of the fence sitters, those who are undecided. They want to hear more. What are the plans, the provisions from either political party before they make their decision to climb down? And as it remains, they're going to remain as fence sitters. Now, I open the floor to the panel and for questions and the discussion to follow while I keep this on the screen here. Because again, this is the focus here. What the people want. Right? Thank you.
I just wanted to jump back to this particular slide. So when you dissect the persons who say that they're not voting this election and they didn't vote the last election, and when you ask the question, what political party are you affiliated with, this is what you got. So we had 16% saying that they're affiliated with the JLP and 21% saying that they're affiliated with the PNP. So if we go back to Don's poll now, It makes sense when you look at this because this is just a quick conversation. If you realize here, the highest point for People's National Party is 39%, and it went down to 32%, like 10% from here, and it went back into, I guess, the PNP pool of the 21% of persons. And if you go back now, go forward here, and if you think about it, it also makes sense because at the time when you check the trend analysis that they came out, it was right after the salary increase, you know, and it represented a great injustice for a lot of persons, and they ran out as a part of that conversation. But they have not. It also, I don't have the chart here, but it has also dwindled down because a lot of these discussions have actually not been sustained or responded to in the media itself. So it's a very, very interesting study that really answers a lot of questions that I personally had about the Jamaican population, and is in sync with and clarifies a lot of the data that we've been seeing by both political parties, and can easily explain why the people are who are these people, why are they uncommitted, and what can we do to get them off the fence. So the realities are, I think let's jump over it a little bit. While we're setting up here, Richard, we're going to set up the chairs for the okay, we're going to set up while I'm talking. Yeah, man, we can set up while I'm talking. I'm just giving you some time. While we so the interesting thing about this is that if you even look at the undecided and you break it apart, you will see that the PNP has one set of undecided who are motivated by a series of variables, and the JLP also has a series of undecided that are motivated by a series of variables. There are some instances where they intersect, but for the most part, the issues are a little bit different. So even if you look at what we had on the board earlier, the reality is that some were more desirable of PNP voters than of JLP voters. Some were higher on the list and some were lower on the list in terms of what we need now to move forward. But we will share with everybody the information on our website, so you can dissect it yourself, because for us, the reality is that this problem can only be fixed by both political parties, not one. So it was important for us to share the findings simultaneously with everyone, because again, it's only if we work together. This is a bigger problem, This is a bigger problem than we thought. This is bigger than JLP, bigger than PNP. This is a minority rule issue. And if you check the history of democracy and development, you realize that the minority rule principle is actually short-lived, 10 to 15 years before the society starts to become dysfunctional. So it's very important that we actually engage with this particular discussion to be able to address the issue. All right, we're just setting up. I'm just stalling while we're setting up. Dr. Nicola Satchel from the Department of Government, a political sociologist. I would say I worked with her on a number of projects. We have several publications together. I think we have a publication on political apathy as well, and e-voting as well, whether or not online voting could be a solution to political apathy. And even with online voting, we found that persons were also not interested in voting conveniently with mobile phones or computers. They still, even when you presented the electronic solutions in front of them, they still didn't feel that they had value. They still didn't feel that they were a part of the system, and they still didn't think that their voice mattered. And as such, even with that presented to them, and this was as far back as 5 years ago, I think. 5 years ago, they still said that they weren't interested. So I'm happy that Dr. Satchel is here, because this is a topic that she's very familiar with. We also had asked Dr. Damian Gordon, Mr. Damian Gordon, sorry, I'm saying doctor because he's currently doing his PhD. I'm his supervisor. He's doing some brilliant work on privacy and security, looking at digital solutions and in the political space, and how they may affect how privacy and security may affect how persons decide on how to engage technology or not to engage technology. Brilliant thesis. We've already spoken about Dr. Johnson. I have Senator Golding, who and Senator. I know I don't know Senator Golding that much. We've met on a couple of occasions. Very brilliant person, very strong-willed. And Senator Bunting, we've met on a number of occasions in his former um, life as Minister of National Security. I don't remember once I told you long ago, that once we stop this scamming, it's gonna lead to greater crime. And I remember we had this discussion long ago at the turnover. Years ago, I do remember when we had the conversation with the DPP. So we have a very brilliant, balanced set of panelists who will certainly provide us with some feedback. So I will start with Sir Bunting. We just work ourselves back around here. What are your observations in terms of what you've heard? Is it a surprise in your own experiences and your own observations? Have you seen the challenge of political apathy? And what is the People's National Party doing to get more persons to participate in the political space itself?
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm speaking from my from the sorry. Yeah, I'm speaking from my experience both as a member of the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, as well as somebody who has been in our own politics in various positions, including General Secretary. And the first observation I want to make, and this is nothing to do with the quality of your research, but just in terms of the voter turnout, that decline, which is probably the trend is correct, but it is exaggerated. It's greatly exaggerated, primarily because we have not cleaned our voters list in about 20 years. So we keep adding, but our methodology for taking off dead persons, migrated persons, etc., is very inefficient and ineffective. So I would estimate that somewhere around 25 to 30% of persons on that list actually are not available to vote because they've either died, migrated, both internal and external migration. And the last time we had what was called a residence verification, where the EOJ sent persons out to the homes where the voters were originally registered, occurred somewhere about 20 years ago. So you have a list that has not been properly verified for about 2 decades. And I will tell you that 30% estimate, I've thought about it from a number of angles. One, from the canvassers that we actually have in the field now, and who tell you that they're just around 30%, about a third, who they just cannot find. And they tell you various stories. They don't live in the parish again. They don't live in the constituency. They live in Portland. They live somewhere else. They've migrated. And although some, with one or two, you have the people who will still fly home to vote, but the vast majority of those who have migrated are not available. And then in terms of cleaning the list, it's very difficult to get dead people removed from the list. I can tell it's much easier to add somebody to the list than it is to remove them. When you add up all those factors, the net migration is about 10,000 persons a year on average over the last 20 years. It's about 7 per 1,000 that die each year. And typically the persons who die would have been of voting age, the vast majority. And when you add all of that up, you're looking at somewhere between 500,000 and 750,000 who their names may be on the list, but they're not actually available to vote. So I think your trend is correct, but I think the actual percentage is depressed because you have so many people on the list who are not eligible to vote. So, sorry, I'm just estimating somewhere between 500 and 750,000 from the various angles.
So I think you are correct because the data does say that. So we're going to separate the data now. So the trend that you saw was the trend based on official statistics.
Right.
But when you factor in, for example, polling data, you'll realize that 38% generally say that they're not going to vote, which means that 62% says that they're going to vote. So if you work it out, it is exactly
Right.
what
There
you
is
just
a
said.
missing element,
Right.
which could be accounted for by
Right.
by what.
So you're not critiquing our data. We're agreeing.
No, I wasn't attempting. I was just saying that the trend is exaggerated. It's been declining, but it's not as high as it suggests.
Yeah, right.
Of course, when you go back to 89 was prior to most of the electoral reforms that were introduced. So then you still had tons of polling divisions who were registering 100+% turnout and so on. So 89 is not the correct base to use, really, if you want comparable, to compare apples with apples. You'd have to start at 93. I think that would give you a better base.
Right.
Because that's when a lot of the reforms were made, where if you vote out a station, for example, it would be canceled and they would issue new ballots and so on.
No.
So I just wanted to say those two,
we're in agreement.
which are not challenging the quality of or the
agreement.
findings, but just saying it's a bit exaggerated or amplified. It's not quite as low as it seems to be, but the trend I would agree with completely.
So we will agree to say that perhaps if it is that the polling data are sync, so Don is 38, ours is 37, I think Blue Dot is 41. So I think 39%, so it would be 61% voter turnout based on, if we're to look at that trend, but that's a study for a different time.
Right,
okay?
right.
But unfortunately, from a academic and a technical standpoint, we have to use the official statistics. Whether it's correct or incorrect,
right. But
still have to use
I'm
it.
just giving you the insights from my time at the ECJ, because we recognized it then, but we've never budgeted to do this re-verification exercise, a residence re-verification exercise. The second point or observation was that as a PNP member and candidate, I'm encouraged because I see a path to victory in your statistics. Because I see a bigger portion of the undecided who are inclined to the PNP. And the challenge or the narrower challenge, I'm just speaking now from a partisan point of view, is how to engage that 21% who are in the uncommitted, who seem to move between, or some portion of them move between PNP support and back into undecided. They don't seem to cross over into the JLP pool. Since there's a bigger pool there, I think that's an opportunity. But also there is they seem to be more liberal or progressive, whichever, however you want to describe it. So I see, interestingly, and this might be a self-criticism, the PNP shifted to a more market-oriented economy and centrist economic policies in the early 90s. Second coming of Michael Manley was much more pragmatic. And I think one of the things that did was narrow the distinction. A lot of people comment that we see the parties as the same, largely because of the economic policies. And I think there is an opportunity to establish a clearer difference in terms of the social policies and not apologize for being much more progressive and leftist in our social policies, even though we may be constrained on the fiscal side. So policies that don't cost a lot of money, such as land reform, for example, standing up for workers' rights, standing up for beach access. These things are not big fiscal burdens, but you can still distinguish yourself on the social justice side and standing up for the people. And I think that that's the opportunity I see in the numbers. Just we're putting on my partisan cap.
Thank you very much. Senator Golding, your observations?
Say she don't use PNP microphone.
And not
As
while
you can
not
see,
while
she's
I'm on
much
that
more
bridge,
tribal
right?
than me.
So I find the demand question very interesting. Particularly because of I wish you had it up so I could see. I don't know if I have the memory to tell you all of them. But anyhow, let me try. So issues that were ranking high, and the interest they had in different welfare / social initiatives surprised me. And partly because I didn't see the two as consistent in the same person. So the death penalty was something they thought should be implemented again. Corruption was of great concern. But then there was an expression of wanting a lot of state benefits, state support, and state entitlements that wasn't consistent for me with those other concerns that they had. So it's informative and very interesting. It's interesting to me also from the point of view of these are the concerns of those who are politically apathetic, but it has some implications too, I think, for national productivity. Because I didn't see in the questions much concerns about the national program for acquisition of wealth. I saw an interest, and it would be interesting if I don't know if you have the answer to this, but the question that stands up in my mind is: were these concerns held personally by the persons who were asked the question, or were these concerns that they had as aspirations for the country as a whole, for their countrymen, as opposed to self? I'd be interested in it was about self. So it's very interesting and very informative to me. No, I too share the concern about political apathy. And it's funny because just yesterday I was in a forum of ladies in a social group, and there was a young woman, or younger than me woman, she was 28, who was in the group, and she was asking me about voting. And when I asked her, what are the reasons why you wouldn't vote? Her answer was, they're the same. They're both the same. She doesn't see any difference. She doesn't see any difference in her community. She lives anyway. So I don't recall it being put in the media brief, but what are the reasons that persons are saying they are not voting? Is that the singular reason? Because certainly I think on the issues that they've highlighted as the concerns that they would wish to address, I think those are issues on which one side or the other can distinguish themselves. So I'd love to hear.
Yes. So, of course, in engaging the persons in the focus group at first, you're gonna ask, why is it that, have you ever voted? You have any interest? And they say no.
Right.
Why is it that you stay? And they will tell you. So rather than focus on the negative and come back to explain why persons are saying that they will stay away, you focus on asking them, then what would get you here? Get you to the voting booth to make your X. And that became the focus. And right across the board, so you design the instrument, like what persons that, in terms of factors that would incentivize voters. When you read and you hear sometimes the parties and platforms saying they want to do X, Y, Z, and when you put it to them, persons say, well, I will come out if, I will vote if. And then you get the collection of items, and then you go there, you test it.
Okay.
When you crunch all of that together and you ask the persons, you voted last election, no. You voting next election, no. You voting this election, no. Why not? The five dominant themes emerge. One, there's a need for economic improvement that they're not seeing for themselves and for others. Two, the infrastructure upgrades. They're not particularly seeing a full infrastructure upgrades. So when you unpack infrastructure upgrades, you'll see that they're okay with roads, but there are buildings that are downtown and in other parishes that are dilapidated and need to be fixed. It also includes garbage collections. This is when you group it together. Governance, accountability, and corruption was third on the list. And we can have a long conversation about that one. Crime also was fourth on the list, and fifth was social services and quality of life. Now, even though we're saying 1 to 5, the truth is, when from a numerical perspective, these would all be of equal value, because the nuance between 1 and 2 would be like a point 1 or a point 2 or a point 3. So basically, simultaneously, all of these things are the reasons why they're not voting, because even though they may see where the government is doing some, housing and infrastructure, it's still not enough. Again, which coincides with what Don put out in a poll recently to say that almost 80% were still not feeling all of what is happening. So it's really a kind of triangulation in terms of representing and articulating that more needs to be done. I think I can remember a quote from a focus group interview that we did, where the lady who was there, she was a peanut seller, and she did say she's her son and her daughter would often show her a lot of what is happening, but she doesn't know anybody personally that it's happening to, and she's not seeing how she's benefiting from it. So I think that quote was kind of telling in that particular regard. So just to add to what Stephen said.
And in terms of breaking on the items, just ask infrastructure, because that's abstract. So what you have to do is to break it down in terms of what they mean by infrastructure. And they would have specified at some point in time roads, garbage collection, schools, hospitals, etc. When you bring that back in, you would have done something called a factor analysis that would group it accordingly. But we didn't want to get in the complication of that in terms of you throw off the audience, in terms of going through a factor analysis. But
So ultimately, then, that also gives context to how I see the questions that are of concern to them, because what essentially is the messaging to me is that people are concerned with their own personal circumstance and well-being and ability to survive and ability to thrive. And while all these other things might be wonderful, they want to see that addressed. And so in like breath, that is where I see the JLP making way now to pivot from the kinds of overarching national development goals and looking at personal circumstances and fundamental things like education and healthcare and water access and that kind of thing. It was interesting to me to see the question about childcare, because that is something. I mean, I'm a graduating mother now, if you can be a graduating mother. So I don't have babies anymore, but it was a very present and real concern and issue for me is balancing childcare responsibilities with the ability to work an 8-hour day. Um, so, and I think in the certainly the discussions that I've heard in my own internal groupings within my party, the 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 pivot in the next iteration of this government would be to look at how the national progress that you have made can be drilled down to impact people's lives more closely, more directly, in a way that is more palpable to them. So it's an interesting study. I thank you for it. I thank the group for it. And I'm excited to see, I, from all the other work you're doing with the study within a study within a study, what you reveal. But definitely voter apathy, which has plagued us for a long time. I agree. It's going to be something we change overnight until we start to address those things. But I'll just add this before I shut up, Prof. Waller. Um, I have been, I think, consistent in my testimony, privately, publicly, wherever, in the shower, that it's when you say it requires both the JLP and the KNP, it is not the desires and hopes and wishes of individual leaders or party personalities that's going to fix that. It's not a handshake. It is creating a system of governance in the country that allows people to connect with our system in a way that's not about going to a ministry or a social service center to get benefits, but says that I am so connected to my parliament and I am able to impact decisions. That's a question I know a lot of people don't want to touch that topic. But for me, it has always been about the system we create for our people to engage.
Thank you very much. Well said. The shocker for me was the education teacher part. If it's one thing that all of the undecided had in common, so there are different nuances of what they have in common, but there's one thing that they all had in common, and there's a concern for quality education at the primary and secondary level. They all have that in common. So it's very clear that education, they see it as a mechanism for social upward mobility, as a way out of poverty, and therefore they see it as a very important part of the entire ecosystem of living in Jamaica. So it's something for both parties to recognize. I'm going to continuing around. I'm going to ask. Oh, Trevor, you wanted to? Okay, yeah. And I'm just saying we're coming around to Mr. Gordon now.
All right, thank you, Prof. Waller. I would like to start by commending the SALISES team led by Prof. Waller and Dr. Johnson for conducting a very timely and relevant study. Obviously, the study comes on the heel of an expected general election that could be called in the next several weeks. Certainly, we expect the next general election to be called in the next 3 to 4 months. Obviously, the findings have implications for the election for both political parties. The findings indicate a continuing concern as it relates to the high percentage of registered voters who are undecided. The findings are consistent with the findings of recently conducted polls. For example, the Dandanusa poll would have shown that the greatest share of voters are undecided. I think it showed that 32% are thereabout intend to vote for the People's National Party, 29% are thereabout for the Jamaica Labour Party, but the largest share of voters is undecided. Now, something that was striking for me is the obvious intersection between the undecided voter and the perception of alienation. What I noted was that the voters were generally undecided also experience the highest internalized sense of alienation. For example, young people have an internalized sense of hopelessness. Yes, many of them feel that they can't live and improve their standard of living in Jamaica, and they are the most apathetic as well. Rural based voters, who obviously communities disproportionately face issues of lack of investment, lack of infrastructure development, lack of economic opportunities, that has accounted for the consistent patterns of rural to urban migration, where many rural folks feel that in order for them to advance economically and socially, they have to migrate to the urban areas, etc. And women, many of the social issues we face disproportionately affect women, right? So it's not surprising that the most alienated groups generally tend to be the most apathetic groups, and they tend to be the ones who are undecided. I will also add, based on my experience interacting with students, this is something that I often do. I, up to recently, I also did this. I asked my students, how many of you voted in the last election? And how many of you intend to vote in the upcoming general election? And in all cases, most of them didn't vote, even those who were eligible, and most of them do not intend to vote. And the biggest factor is many of them believe that their vote simply will not make a difference. They believe that their vote is an exercise in futility, right? And I will say that it's a hostile environment in Jamaica to be a politician. And let me tell you why. Jamaicans are saying that the good have to suffer for the bad. And voters really distinguish between good or bad politicians. To be honest, they lump all politicians into this category. I think Hillary Clinton used this term, the basket of deplorables. I won't use that term to describe politicians, but certainly many voters just say they're the same and they don't distinguish between those across the political divide. Which means that in this context, those politicians who are positively impacting laws, policies, or making a genuine difference in their constituencies, serving people, they are met with the same skepticism and cynicism and distrust as all other politicians, right? And so we have a democracy that is in retreat. But this was not always the case, because as the data indicate, there was a time when voter turnout was around 80, 70 plus. It was very high. So this retreat is a culmination of a long process of people being frustrated, turned off, people, the mismanagement, the failed promises, over-promising, corruption. So this is a culmination of a long process of people coming to reckon with what they believe is a system that has utterly failed them, to the extent that the trust between voters and political parties now appear to be irrevocably broken, to the extent that many Jamaicans simply don't even engage in political discourse. Once they hear the word politics or anything that has to do with politics, they don't want to engage. They don't attend political events, they don't consume political content, and they don't care if the ideas put forward will benefit them or not. They're just not interested politically. And how do we rectify that? We rectify that by, I say, we need to take accountability. Very often politicians tend to approach voter apathy with condescension, to say, well, you should vote. Why aren't you voting? It's like admonishing the voters to say you have a duty and a responsibility to vote. Sometimes you hear politicians say to voters, if you don't vote, you don't deserve representation, right? So even though many of you as current politicians are not directly responsible for how the voters perceive politicians, you have to also accept that you have now become victims of the sins of political administrations of the past, right? And how do you get to a place of, getting the voters and the undecided voters to be convinced? You have to take accountability first and foremost, and recognize, secondly, that it will be a marathon and not a sprint, right? In other words, you have to show consistency in terms of meeting the expectations of voters. And the expectations of voters, voters for me have a rubric. There are many things that they want at the same time. So sometimes you say that you're making gains in this area, but at the same time, they say, oh, but you're not meeting the expectation in other areas. So you may be creating jobs, and they may say that the poverty rate is going down and crime is going down. but they're still concerned about the utterances of certain politicians when they take the public platform. They believe that those utterances don't meet their standards and expectations of decency and civility. Right? They're concerned about human rights abuses, so especially police abuses, even though crime is going down. Right? They are concerned about the lack of meritocracy in terms of public sector employment practices, etc. Right? Because they're concerned about politicians who have held power for long in seats and have not relinquished power despite strong perception of their underperformance as members of parliament. They're concerned about the lack of quality service provision at the local level. So again, it's a holistic expectation and a holistic view. So you may say, well, we're making gains and we're doing positive things, but you don't meet that holistic expectations of voters. So as far as I'm concerned, as politicians, you have to be consistent, and it will not be easy to win back the trust of the voters. We need to be committed to consistently doing, saying, and be exemplary. And I think that is very important as well, right? So those are my takeaway, as I noted from the findings, is that those voters who have a greater sense of internalized alienation also are the most apathetic voters. So we need to address the issue of alienation. Again, even the broader context of macroeconomic growth, many voters feel alienated, certainly at the individual level, from the broader context of macroeconomic growth. So with the trickle-down effect thing that we generally talk about, many voters simply are not feeling it, and they want to feel that they're personally benefiting from the growth and development that we boast about. And certainly it appears that many voters simply feel alienated from what the formal data and statistics are saying about the economic trajectory of the country. They don't feel that they are benefiting and they are directly being impacted by what is happening generally or broadly in the economy. Right? And I will also say that politicians must be exemplary and must accept that the process of regaining the trust of voters is going to be long and difficult. But you have to show consistency in terms of doing the right thing, saying the right thing, be exemplary, and also understanding where voters are coming from, rather than a tone that indicates arrogance or condescension. So those are some of my insights as well as my recommendations in terms of how we can deal with the issue of voter apathy, right? And also address the issues of the undecided voters.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gordon. Very insightful as usual. I think the observation that you made in terms of the people in society who are generally or traditionally alienated could also be triangulated to those persons who are most apathetic. It's quite interesting. And we do have questions that we can explore it. We do have some questions in the questionnaire that we can actually explore whether or not that is actually the case, because that's an interesting hypothesis. It would certainly throw the entire conversation into a different, and it would explain the path, why path would be so high up as well. Interesting. Okay, I'll have to come back to that. There are all sorts of stuff going through my head right now. I'm going to ask and the other person who I know all sorts of stuff going through her head as well. Because we work on a number of projects together. So I know Nicola. So I'm quite interested in hearing what Nikki has to say, as long as it's nothing that she and I are going to get into any argument about. Nikki, go ahead.
Not today. All right. Thank you, Professor Waller, and thank you to SALISES for the invitation. And much has been said, most of which I agree with. But I think one of the values of this research and the approach is the conflation of the behavioral approach we have discussed a number of times. So you're seeing those persons who did not vote and those who are saying, I have no intention, right? So I am deciding. So that 66 is really pulling together a lot, which I think my fellow panelists have unpacked a bit. So we're getting the political disillusionment. We're getting political indifference. We're getting those who are protesting We're not seeing what it is that we want. And so we have not taken a decision. So we're seeing all of these issues coming into this whole category of the undecided. And interestingly, this is where the literature is going. And we saw this with the elections in the US, where there was a lot of discussion about swing states and swing voters and what do we do. These are the people who are so undecided that we're seeing in this research that the politicians have to be so delicate about how they project themselves in these spaces. So you saw a lot of broadcasting from these swing states because they are determining. And even with the polling, and we're seeing the movement already as the campaigning has started and we see the ramping up, we're seeing movement. And so our work, Professor Waller, on the political communication becomes important. How is it that the politicians now will try to present themselves and their policies to a population who is no longer partisan? Born PNP, born JLP. The millennials are saying, no, we want something more. And that is what we're seeing internationally. How do you appeal to not only your base, but a group of people who are standing back and saying, I'm demanding more. I want to be seen. I want to be heard. And I hear your concern, Senator Golding, about what is happening structurally and how this is affecting the individual, and how do you get those two things to correspond in your messaging. But there's also a problem when you have those structural things happening and we get to some of those micro things that came up in the study where we're saying we have free education up to this point, but people are saying, what about the teachers? What is happening in the classroom space? So we're having this major issue in the governance system. We're trying to improve legislation, we're trying to improve remuneration, but what is happening in the space? And this is what the millennials are unpacking, and this is what we're seeing internationally with the British elections, with the US elections, that there needs to be something more in terms of the demand. And when we go back to the 2023 LAPOP study, and we see where people are saying, we do not trust our political institutions. We do not trust our politicians. Then there is another issue. So we are going to have that apathy. We are going to have that indecision. And as my colleague was saying, now it is not only the base, not only the predictable, and I love that it's not just, oh, we have a Garrison constituency or a Garrison community, but there are a group of people now that are holding the politicians accountable. And I heard when Dr. Johnson said, vote buying, someone said, who is selling? Right? So the vote buying dynamic, the vote selling dynamic, and what it is that people really need to go to the polls, I think will be very interesting for this election. And I'm really looking forward to the political communication, and maybe Professor Waller, we can unpack that and how this dynamic will actually change it.
In terms of going forward, I look at it as using a problem solution approach, and that is going to require communication to unlock. Let me give you an example. Oftentimes than not, you'll hear a politician go on a platform, and I sympathize. And they will say, I will give you water. Vote for me, you get water. They vote for the person, they don't get water. There goes a missed opportunity, right? Because there goes a missed opportunity to say, hey, you can't get water on your property unless you have a title for it, right? Or you're paying your taxes. So here's what I'm going to do. A particular administration, I think it's the PMP, created LAMP. A lot of them are not aware that under LAMP, they can get title for their land. A lot of the lands that they live on is the great-grandmother give the grandmother, and it comes on by generation. They say, that's your land, and you leave it at that. So there's a missed opportunity. One, you're not paying taxes, And if you can show them that if they pay taxes, they will get the water and the land, rather than just basically saying, I'm going to give you water, knowing quite well, if you were to pull the evidence, majority of these persons don't have land tenure. Help them to get the land tenure, which solve that problem, gives you taxes, as well as then you can give them the water, and the taxes also help to pay and maintain the water. But we're going around with the Santa Claus approach and saying, I'm going to give you water, I'm going to give you this, and then you don't deliver. That creates a disappointment. So in that sense, now we're going to have to find a way to reverse that, be very transparent, identify what the true problem is, solve that problem, as we say in Jamaica, use one stone and kill two birds. And that's one example.
Thank you, Steve, man. Thank you very much, Nicola, for your insights. I am going to open up the floor to sorry, Daniel. Oh, Daniel, sorry, Daniel. Daniel, you sure don't want to come up here, Daniel? Okay.
So I apologize. Good afternoon, everyone. I had to borrow a vehicle on my way here because it was so important to be here. And when my car wasn't going to start, I said to the gentleman beside of me, "Me need a ride for go for you. Beg a ride no?" He said, "All right." And just, "You want a car?" So me take a car and come up for you. But me leave my shoes in my car, so me couldn't possibly go up there to go sit down because my mother would have a fit. I just said it out loud, so she already here. So my apologies. But I'm intrigued by the findings, and I'm particularly attracted to two words that Senator Golding used, which was self and country. I'm a patriot at heart. I use the word I'm a nationalist, and to some people that's offensive. I was wondering to the learned person sitting if there is a way that if we could find that sweet spot of looking at improving nationalism, that would affect voter apathy. And my definition of voter of nationalism touches where the Dr. Johnson said about taxes. It clicked in my head. If as citizens I understand what my responsibilities are, so I pay taxes. I pay taxes because I've seen some signs years ago that would say, pay your property tax because that's how you get water. If we had something that allowed persons to feel connected, to come back to the position of connectedness, if we had a system where we were connected to it, then I'm wondering whether that in turn would affect apathy and would build public trust. Because no, we're not just talking about being Jamaican because I'm born here. It's buying into the idea that I'm a part of the fabric that makes Jamaica better. It makes sense. I don't know if it makes sense to you. But I'm working it through in my brain, and I'm wondering if part of what we need to do is focus less on political parties and more on building Jamaica literally and making me feel as a voter and as an individual for part of it. And if I give you 5 seconds more, my rationale for that comes on the conversation I had with an attorney in the bench in Clarendon the other day. And he said to me, you see, the challenge we're having is that many persons don't want responsibility. And I thought, not a morning like this when we feel overwhelmed with responsibility. And he made a point. He says, most people they want the land from my grandmother to my grandmother to my grandmother because I don't pay taxes for it. I didn't have to buy it. I don't have to pay for anything because I get it. But once you talk to them and you start to say to them, you have to pay the taxes, you have to pay for this, you have to pay for that, then it becomes a problem because we don't understand that paying is part of growing up, if you understand what I mean. So my question still stands. Does nationalism and that sweet spot, if we're able to nurture that, would that be something that would be, based on your data, something that we could look at in improving voter apathy?
Let me just answer quickly and pass on to Stephen. I know the answer to that question. And let me just give you a quick story. You know, when I went to do my PhD in New Zealand, I was at an apartment complex and I needed to get some stuff at the supermarket. So I had befriended one of my neighbors who had a little car, and I was a bit, the story of me fitting in that car is a different story. But he took me to the supermarket and I said, okay, give me a couple of minutes, let me go and shop. So I went into the supermarket and I picked up the usual things that I'm accustomed to: the Kellogg's cornflakes, the Colgate soap, the US brands, the usual US brands that we're accustomed to going into the supermarket and pick up. Anyway, This 19-year-old comes up to me in the supermarket and says, "Oh no, 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 we can't do this." I said, "Why? What's happening?" These are all US brands, and we can't stop them from coming in New Zealand because of the W Trade Organization. 19-year-old. And he took me through the supermarket and he took up all of the US brands out of my trolley and replaced them with New Zealand brands and said to me, "Once we're friends, this is what you have to do." But that came from civics. That came from a comprehensive civics program that New Zealand has from preschool straight to the end of high school, where they teach them things about being a good citizen, being about the nation, about climate change, about economics, about finance, about entrepreneurship. So they have a very comprehensive civics program that they start from preschool straight up to the end of high school. Even now, if you check it, they're teaching them about AI and Python and computer programming, not as a part of the official curriculum per se, but as a civic education activity because they recognize that this kind of socialization from the primary level, if you speak to the education psychiatrist and psychologists, will tell you that you have to start from this age and get them socialized and programmed, just as how Microsoft gave free laptops and computers in Africa to the preschools and secondary schools and primary schools, and now every CEO in Africa chooses Microsoft applications as solutions in Africa because they were socialized to do so. So at the end of the day, it comes down back to how do you program people? I'm sorry for using that term, it's a psychology term. How do you program, psychologically program socialized people to be able to act a particular way? And a lot of it, to be quite frank, and this answers another question, has to do with a duty of care. When I say duty of care is, I mean, if you go into politics, yes, I do have a problem if it is about you. Okay, I'll help you to make it to be about you. But you also have a duty of care to the people of Jamaica to actually do it, what it is that you've promised that you ought to do. Because if you don't do that, what happens is what Stephen speaks about, and what the outcome is now is that you start to lose trust and confidence in the system because of broken promises. And consequently, now you become disconnected from the system. And now we are now in a space where we are operating with the principle of minority rule. So it's an entire ecosystem of change that needs to occur for us to be able to start seriously dealing with this problem.
I just wanted to say something before Stephen, just to speak directly to what you mentioned, Daniel. So a work we did a couple years ago, the young people said, "We love Jamaica, we're patriotic, we identify with being Jamaican, but we just do not see our country offering opportunities for us." So those persons who said we love Jamaica were also saying we want the first opportunity to leave. Because if I go overseas, I can see my personal goals. So although I love Jamaica, I can't see myself here. And this is what you see in the study, that this economic issues, the structure of healthcare, welfare. So these things occupying the minds of the population that was studied. So I just wanted to mention that.
All right. Continuing along the path of pragmatism. And it is going to take two, both, well, there are maybe more than one political parties. It's going to take the two major political parties in Jamaica to be on board. Using the example of, again of promising water, yeah? I go on the platform and I explain the procedure and say, well, we kind of have to get the taxes. As Daniel said, others want something, but they don't want to pay for it. Somebody come on the platform and said, vote for me and I will give you the water. No procedure explained. You're going to vote for the one who said the part of least resistance and say, hey, I'm going to vote for him. But when he doesn't deliver, you're going to say, I'm not going to vote again because you're disappointed. And you say, all of them are the same. So we're going to have to, again, teach them how to identify or exercise the duty of care as political party to say, hey, I am going to get you to the part. Trust me to get you there. And explain how.
Sorry about that, Professor O, but Daniel, I think there's an expectation among people that there should be some reward for being patriotic. Right? You can't say that or expect people to be patriotic when they have unmet expectations and unmet needs. So you're asking people to invest in the country and make sacrifices, but they're saying they have calculated to themselves that those investments do not there are little returns on those investments. So you're telling people to pay taxes, but they complain about the state of the road and other things. So why should I pay more taxes when I'm not getting improved services from government? I'm not getting improved representation. Why should I stay in my country when my talent is undervalued or underpaid, or so you have to ensure that we don't have misaligned expectations, that there's reciprocity. When people invest in their country, people are patriotic, there should be some tangible and worthwhile return on that kind of investment and sacrifice. And in that context, patriotism may be seen as being more rewarding. Or
Okay, we have a question here from Trevor.
Well, okay, Trevor. Thank you so much, colleagues. And I just want to first of all congratulate the team from SALISES for the work that they have done and continue to do, because it's very necessary. And also, of course, to congratulate the discussants, two political parties represented, and of course, our team here from UA and outside of UA for the conversation that we are having. So I've been making some notes while we are going through. And one of the questions that came to me at the first instance was, what is the Jamaican dream? And are there competing Jamaican dreams? Because we are existing in a different era from the one where we had this strong paternal government, where people sat down and expected that the political leaders would do everything for them. We have a more developed and robust set of citizens, many of them coming from the working classes. They are not from the more wealthy classes, and they expect, as a part of this democracy that they're a part of, that they will see opportunities for themselves as a part of this Jamaican dream that they have crafted. And when I talk with my students, 19-year-old, 20-year-olds, and other young people outside, they have very specific items that Stephen and Professor Waller align with what they have identified in the study. They need proper housing. As they tell you, they want to live in a press button. You press a button to go through your gate. They are very clear on this. High-rise buildings, late model cars, newer cars. They tell you very specific things that align with this notion of living in a society that has welfareist policies that help them, but also have very capitalistic liberal policies that allow them to benefit and to live the way they expect to live. We also have to understand that we are living in a world that is far more open, Trevor. We used to learn about this in Government 1001. Communication. Our politicians have to recognize the critical importance of the opportunities that young people have, not so young people have, to see what is happening all over the world, as well as inside of Jamaica, and make comparisons and therefore make their demands. So they are asking you to do this for them, not on behalf of a political party, but as citizens of Jamaica who deserve these benefits. It's very important. So they are not asking for Santa Claus to come at Christmas and give them a bag of goodies because they have been good. They are citizens of Jamaica. They are young people, not so young people, with expectations. They're working hard. They want to remain here. How do they achieve good housing, proper infrastructure, transportation, and opportunities to thrive? And the kind of macro policies that we see coming out of the government and some of the suggestions from the opposition suggest that perhaps at the base, the micro needs of individuals may not be met very quickly. And so I do a lot of what we call digital ethnography. I live on social media. And I mind the comments because people speak their truths in a lot of these comments. And they are very critical, a lot of instances of the lack of trickle down in our society. So they see a lot of things being deployed at the top and a few people benefiting. People are asking critical questions. When is it my turn? When is it my family's turn? What about me? When I go to the University of the West Indies, UTech, NCU, and I have a student's loan, how will I pay it off if my loan amount is $10 per month and my salary is $15? and I need to buy a new car and I would like to deposit on a house. They ask these clear, they're very clear about it. And so the question, Stephen, and the points that you find in your study, which seem to be very mixed. You know, they are looking at some of the macro issues, but a lot of the micro issues is kind of connecting very clearly to what we see in the digital ethnographies that we we do on social media. People are macro people, they are mixed people, they have a desire for themselves, they have desires for the country, and they are asking our political leaders to recognize them as full individuals, not as children with a need for a father, but as citizens who want to be equally recognized, and they want some things for free. We are never going to get out of that. And so one of the points I wrote on my phone here is also political education. Our society has strayed significantly from the era that my mother told me about, where politicians would meet people on the ground and tell them about their society, explain to them the workings of the politics, how it works, and the civics society that we used to get in schools would tell you how to be a citizen. Why do we pay taxes? And we have raised the point so people understand being a citizen not only means getting free things or almost free, but having to contribute tangibly from my salary, for example, so that these things can continue to be there. We have lost that way, and I think the political parties, especially People's National Party, used to be very strong on political education on the ground, telling people, teaching them, giving them that heads up as to what it means to be a citizen and what your expectations have to be matched with. That is something that we have to return to. For many of the young people, they are highly educated, many of them coming to the universities, but many of them do not have that clear grip on that kind of political education and socialization, Professor Waller, that will help them to engage with the need to be taxed so that we can have better benefits. And so what is the Jamaican dream? What is kind of political education, and what are the social classes that we are talking about in this study? Because I see a lot of people coming from the base, working class and lower middle class, asking for social mobility. Thank you so much.
I thank you, Professor Hope, for that question about the Jamaican dream. It didn't seem like so long, but I am in my 20th year of returning home. And I came home with that on my mind 20 years ago, because I had spent my graduate school and law school life in the United States. And it was very clear to me what the American dream was. And everybody shared at the time, we thought. Everybody shared this common American dream. That may have changed, no, but but let me stick to my grid square. So what is our Jamaican dream? At some point in being home, I realized we developed the Vision 2030 plan. And I remember, because at the time it used to be repeated in political speeches: place to live, work, raise families, and do business. Yes, and do business. But that's not it's not something that's internalized by my housekeeper. It's not something that is internalized by my 26-year-old nephew who's just graduating from UTech. It's not something that's internalized by my sons who are 17 and 19. So you're right. We have to determine and decide and figure out what is the Jamaican dream. My concern, though, and when I heard, I'm not remembering who said it, but when I heard it said that it's going to take both the JLP and PNP, I think, Prof, you might have said it. Yes. And Dr. Johnson said it as well. I wonder if the level of political apathy that exists can really be impacted in a positive way by the political parties or anything that they do. And I ask that question because there is a deficit of trust between the people and politicians generally. And if there is a deficit of trust, and it has been said, I'm not concluding anything from my own data. I've heard it said so many times. If there's a deficit of trust, how do the political parties impact positively or reduce the apathy? The second part of my comment on that would be to Professor Hope's remarks would be the question of messaging and effective communication. Young people seem to want certain things. As you said, they're very specific in how they see these wants. But I tend to liken everything to my household. So I can imagine going home after this forum and seeing the kitchen light on this afternoon. And I'm going to ask the question, do we own shares in JPS? And they understand the connection between burning light to increase the revenue for JPS. And immediately the light will go off. But for the young people who are saying they want things, is there a connection between where we have been economically for decades versus where they want to go? And maybe even if they're thinking about country, where they want the country to go. Because I can't go out and buy the new car that you want if I'm not earning enough to satisfy my needs, to pay my rent, to pay my medical bills, to put food on the table. And that's the situation Jamaica has been in. Now, my side of the political fence, the Labour Party, my Prime Minister, have done a lot of talking about the economics and the need for improving the macroeconomic situation in Jamaica. If this is what you're picking up in February, March, April, then I think maybe we have a little bit more work to do to connect those dots to the realities. But I don't think that's where the young people have stopped. They seem to be saying, okay, fine, but what about me? And so this election cycle, political parties, my party, is going to have to be speaking very directly to the people about what our plan is for what is going to happen after the election, that they are going to be able to feel very personally that's going to impact, if not them, somebody they know. Because you may not be personally impacted, but if your neighbor is impacted and you can see progress, it stimulates hope, right? So I'll land with this one. A year and a half ago, I was in London at a Commonwealth Parliamentary Association conference, and they were talking about parliamentary democracies. And I made the comment about accountability and how you achieve accountability in parliamentary democracies, because part of what we've discussed today is the question of duty of care to people and so on. And I said this, how many, which I'll change for the local situation here, how many of us Jamaicans understand the structures and workings of the political parties? How many of us understand how decisions are made within a party, how elections are held within a party? How many of us understand why Senator Bunting is the candidate in Manchester versus Senator Crawford. We don't understand these things as the undecided group. And the last thing I will say on that one is, if political parties and the workings of political parties is so unknown to the people, what is your take based on your data about how these same political parties can impact the people? Because we have companies, they're institutions, they're organizations, but they're not accountable to the people, they're accountable to their membership. And yet, they hold significant power within the constitutional structure of our country. It's something we want to think about and grapple with. I don't anticipate that my side or the other will be pondering on these issues coming to the election, but it's something to talk about.
It's all right.
Let me just quickly respond. As it relates to, if we need the PNP and the JLP, we have to engage them, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who make policy in government. So as it relates to the civic program, we'll have to engage them in that regard. And more so than anything else, a lot of persons make a decision about engaging politics based on personal experiences or vicariously through family or friends. And as a result of that, the actions of the member of parliament or the minister, what they do or don't do, may influence how the person responds to them. So, they themselves will have to be the change agents, right? They themselves will have to be the persons who facilitate the change. So that's why we have to engage them. The second thing I think you spoke about was the relationship with the politician. How can you as a political party change the person if we're the cause? Think of it as a relationship. You go into a relationship with someone, it's going on quite well, person start to become dysfunctional. I'm sure people here know what I'm talking about. The person start to become dysfunctional. Now you have two choices. There are three. You can either stick with the person and stick with the dysfunctionality. You can leave the person, or you can facilitate change. Change is, no, but a mediator, right? But we have mediators here, man. We have Naya as a mediator. We have civil society, basically. We have the universities a part of the mediator. But the bottom line is that the private sector, it's a process that can be better if people decide that they want to make it better and they want to change it for better circumstances. And once they make that decision that I want to change, in the very same way, persons in relationship get up and say today, I think I'm going to be a better partner, and you see the light for whatever reason. And they try. And some are inspired by the Lord, some are inspired by other types of mediators. But the bottom line is we can't give up. We just have to try to see how best to put the different variables in place to facilitate that kind of change that we need. But we all have to work together to get it there. Trevor, go ahead.
Let me take up from where you left, Lloyd. That question of social agency. In other words, do we not need to do more to make persons, particularly the demographic of the younger, know their capacity to change things? And let me give you a concrete example. How many times have we told people that the reason why they had a festival song in 2023, or was it, is because they stood up when the government said there'd be no festival song. You had a festival song. My question to Stephen and to you, Lloyd, as I congratulate you, when you ask the youngsters, did you vote or do you plan to vote? would you also ask them, what are you doing to improve security on the campus? Nothing to do with politics. It has to do with their sense of agency. What are you doing? The 138 demonstrations recently, which rose up and went down. How far do the youngsters have a sense of their own capacity to impact things that relate to them and they understand relate to them even more than the politics? In other words, that notion of the dream, to realize the dream in your own space, is where I'm asking, what more can we each do? It's a strategic question, because I think that, generally speaking, amongst the younger generation, their sense of agency and capacity is not where it was once upon a time, and where it will be again, I'm sure, soon, because they are not sufficiently aware of what they can do within their own space. And we can do far more to show what is possible by virtue of what has been done. Not just festival song. Why did the government withdraw the proposal to sequester cabinet papers from 30 years to 70 years? People spoke out. And there's so many examples that we need to keep explaining and demonstrating, so that folks don't say what you can do for me, but what I can do for myself in my own space, in things that impact me immediately. And I think that there'll be a spontaneous awakening over a period of time. People don't sit down and take things indefinitely. You want an immediate example, look at the hotel workers recently in Jamaica. When I used to go to hotels 5 years ago, a man would call you one side and say, Brother Trevor, boy, things really bad, you know. Hotel are going good, but we can't even more. My position, because the man, they may let me go. 6-month contract, depend on renewal. Ultimately, that sense of fear, that sense of I can't make a difference will go, but it can be speeded up with more public and civic education from the examples which people can be aware of. The sense of agency. More specifically and immediately, questions to our political representatives and to the authors of the study. To what extent are you guys going to be publishing manifestos within a short period of time, we have an election coming up, that can speak to some of the questions in the minds of those uncommitted and some of the desires that they would like to see? And beyond that, to what extent would publishing and communicating effectively those manifestos have an impact on those who at this point are saying, I don't know what I'm going to do about this, I don't know what I'm going to do about that. These are my concerns. That's 2 specific questions. Thank you very much.
All right. So just to let you know, thank you for the question, Trevor. So this was a knowledge, attitude, and practice survey. So we had questions about persons' awareness of things, questions about persons' attitudes and belief systems about things, and questions about behavior. So we can mine the data some more and get some information. We've had questions about if you prefer tasty over juicy, Patty, but that's a webinar. That's a forum for another time. That's a forum for another time. Well, yeah. So we in plotting ideology, we had to ask several of these questions. So we can mine, and we do have an entire section that talks about political participation in terms of what people are doing in their communities and what they're doing for their country, the country themselves. So we have that data. I don't know if anybody wants to respond to the question about the manifesto.
That I don't have specific information on that, but I do know that it has been actively worked on for some time. And a number of us have contributed. So I would expect any time now.
You're showing your implicit bias. Just teasing you, just teasing you. Don't take me out. Mhm. I can confirm manifesto is largely prepared, being fine-tuned now. But just from my own experience, I think the days of the grand manifestos, 70, 100 page, are really behind us. People don't have that attention span anymore. So it's social media driven. And truthfully, I listen to so many things about patriotism and, they sound nice and accountability. In 2020, I had the highest score of any MP. Jeanette was here earlier. She could back me up. Of any MP on their accountability meter portal thing. It didn't matter hill of beans to anybody. Nothing. It didn't get me one vote. I hear people talk about what's the Jamaican dream. Based on how young people approach me, is to get a farm work card, is to get a visa, to travel, to leave, right? The thing of agents, political campaigns are largely fought now in the arena of information operations. It's really just about whose propaganda is more persuasive, more stronger, who can micro-target and play on people's prejudices and fears I don't want to come across as cynical, but I know what we face out there on a daily basis. I know there's a small cottage industry of GLP activists who, the minute I post something, within seconds, there's a whole slew of critical comments underneath it. So when you live in such an artificial, manipulated environment, there are bots, there are trolls, there are everything. It's even hard to, and I'd love to talk to Dr. Hope, how she distills the real people from the paid opinions and the bots, etc. But it comes down to just, it's almost like a battle of social media manipulation. You have that feeling at the end of the day. Now, obviously, the only way to counter that, in a sense, is by face-to-face interaction. You have to go back to the old days of organizing, where you don't rely on the ear war anymore, but you get down and you sit across from people and you persuade them. And that's I think the agency, that's the opportunity that's perhaps left to engage young people around agency, etc., etc. But if you leave it in the sphere of information operations, you're actually going to disempower people, give them less agency, and make them more what should I say, apathetic.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Okay, hey everyone, good afternoon. My name is Nathan Roper, and I'm a 20-year-old male, obviously, and I am in the age group of the people that we are talking about. I am a member of the Gen Z generation, and I have spoken with many of my friends, many of my classmates at multiple times, and a key thing that has often come up, that has been addressed here in depth, if you were to ask them what their main issue is with the current political system, they would say something along the lines of, the current political parties, the options available only give the illusion of choice, in the sense that both parties are very similar in terms of ideology and rhetoric. And we saw that also in the ideological charts, where both the JLP and the PMP shared very similar ideas. And that's the major thing. So when it comes down to the political season and the political campaigning, what oftentimes people see who are my age and how they feel is that both parties are just showing smoke without fire, where they're talking very dogmatic rhetoric, trying to poke holes into the other side, instead of perhaps bringing on issues that people feel actually matter. And that politics in Jamaica now has become more so about dragging the other side down than necessarily bringing up something that matters, that is substantial. And that has affected how the youth view politics so much in a way that I'm not sure we can ever really recover from, at least so easily, because I myself keep very up to date in political affairs. And truth be told, when I think the deadline to enter the voters list has passed, I didn't do anything about it. And I care very much about the Jamaican political system. So if that is me, a person that cares, can you imagine how much other people who just pass the whole thing by feel? Because for many of them, they just view the whole thing as entertainment. They like to sit back, grab some popcorn and watch. And maybe comment on their WhatsApp status and Instagram, but they're not going to go out and necessarily vote because they just don't think it matters. And so you might have cases where people know, some of the more knowledgeable ones might know about FinSac or Trafigura or the 2010 Dutta scandal or the Dead Baby scandal. I can go on and name all the issues going back from independence. But many of the youth just really don't care because in their minds, the two political parties are just so similar that it doesn't make a difference. And both political parties seem to, for the most part, have found something that they think works. Because if they didn't think it would work, they would do something to change it. And therefore, my question is, to you two are both important leaders in your political parties. Do you think your political parties are willing to really and truly adapt to change? Or do you think that in general, there is a sense of complacency where we found something that works and sure the overall voters turnout is going down, but we can still win an election. At the end of the day, if that gets us into the parliament with enough seats to have a prime minister, does that matter? And then there's another thing too. Throughout all this discussion, we've talked about the JLP and the PMP, we've talked about need to reform. I have not heard anybody on this panel discussion mention the possibility of a third party. I've heard nobody mention that. It has been attempted before, and it might not have necessarily worked. For example, we can all think about NDM and Bruce Golding. When that came about, a lot of people were suddenly up in arms, and people voted. They didn't win any seats, but there was a huge turnout. And that was a sign that people wanted something different. It might not have been enough to win any seats in the parliament at that moment, but it showed that people just felt that there needed to be a change. And I think that's where most of the youth feel these days, that there needs to be a change. Because while we have two political parties, they just genuinely don't see the difference. And therefore, they're not inclined to act. But if they were given something else, something fresh, if they were given a change, a substantial change, would that be enough? And do you two feel that your political parties are at a state where they are willing to make that change?
Well, I'm going to suggest you give the mic to the lady beside you. To your left. No, the one to answer on behalf of the People's National Party, because she's much younger than I am, and she's the Deputy General Secretary for Communications. So I would throw that response to her.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for that question. And the fact that you're here this evening means that you do take political participation seriously. I'm really disappointed to hear that you didn't take the step to go out and get enumerated. All right. So for me, I've been listening and I've been soaking up. I've taking the lessons, Professor Waller, Professor Johnson. For me, when you threw out Professor Johnson that, it's up to the two political parties, it's over to you now. We've gone out there, we've gotten the data. What are you going to do to change this? I felt a little attacked because for me, when I was in Professor Monroe's class here, Politics 101, it was about this democracy and the democracy deficit, I call it the democracy deficit. How do I participate in a process that I don't even know exists? It wasn't until my first year at UWI that I realized that there's this whole thing called politics. You have a right to vote and, universal adult suffrage. All throughout my high school, my primary school journey, I never knew anything like that existed or that participation was required of me. And that if I pay my taxes, I can get water. So when we go on the political platform, putting on my other hat, I don't have the time to explain to a person step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. By the time I reach step 5, the JLP got the vote. So yes, there is some commercial part to what we do, but the truth is there are other assets in society that must also be brought to this conversation. I'm interested to find out if the data pointed to the responsibility of the media, the responsibility of the educational facilities or universities or college or civic programs, the responsibility of media or entertainers or NGOs, all of those in the public sphere. How do they encourage this young man to get involved and the value of getting involved, other than just the political actors being asked to vote? With respect to the Gen Zs, and I talk to them daily and they blow my mind because they come from a different, I think, it's not just one generation between me and them. It feels like about 50. They think totally left field because he found a problem or I don't see the difference or whatever, but they retreat. Instead of saying, let me try this one, see if it works, or try that one, they retreat. How do we capture a mind like this that has so regressed or is so recessed, actually, that they are unwilling to participate? They're much more comfortable with seeing who can make the latest meme to attack the politician versus finding a way to get involved in the process. I don't think the political parties have the capacity, even with the history of our political education programs and the knowledge of those, we do not have the capacity to get the rest of society on board this mission of the importance of being involved in the democratic process. We play our part, but I'm interested to find out if the media also has a responsibility, or is it just going after the most salacious headline? A politician said this or whatever. How too does political clientelism come into the process and into the conversation? Because when I'm going to a constituent to say, I have 50 black tanks, I need to win an election, I'm only going to give these 50 black tanks to these 50 laborites or PNP because they're the ones who are going to vote for me. That's an immediate need for a political party. But at the end of the day, me coming in as a bright-eyed young politician and saying, I want to give 50 tanks to the first most needy, 50 most needed people, I lose the election. So I kind of have a little... and that's the point. If I give them to the uncommitted, and I have this as a practitioner in the field, I try to do it because I'm young and new and modern, so I'm giving it to the uncommitted. The uncommitted say to me, well, the house and the land was given to my grandfather and my grandmother by the PNP, and the title, yes, but what have you done for me? That was my grandmother. Them still living at the house, that the PNP gave them. But what have you done for me? So this political clientelism, I understand why a newcomer in the political conversation would feel like, I need to speak to that demographic. For me, though, the conversation is wider than these two political parties. It is about the University of the West Indies, UTech. It is about the music. It's about the culture. It's about the education that says to you, it's okay to be a part of a political party. We don't discuss it with our kids at home. My father is a pastor, I never hear it before. You understand? You don't discuss these things in church. It's taboo. I think we need to demystify the politics. And when we start there, by making it important and showing to our young people why it matters, then we can start building, and then we can hold the politicians accountable for the corruption and those things. All right, thank you.
Sorry, I'm going to come to you. Sorry, let me just respond to you real quick. Yes, sorry, Ms. Birchall. Yes, we did collect information on the media because, again, part of doing this is oftentimes we hear nearing an election, there's an advocacy campaign pressuring persons to vote. And I say pressure, saying it's a universal right without an effort being made to find out what they want. And in presenting these findings, we're not asking you to forego the needs of others, because your base is your base and you can't give away sure for unsure. But we are asking to expand the scope. But at the same time, I do empathize with politicians. You do have my sympathy, right? And let me give an example, because there's no guarantee and it has been tried before. And I will give you an example from either side. Christopher Tufton, in 2011, he lost by 13 votes, right? Now, part of it is he was the Minister of Agriculture. He's from St. Elizabeth, which is a breadbasket. He passed a policy to expand the size of the fishing net, right? Because they were catching young fish and it was depleting the ecosystem and the Treasure Beach area, right? The people them said they weren't catching enough fish, so they vote him out because they blame him for that. I guess that could have been fixed by, hold on a second. I guess that could have been, hold on a second. I guess that could have been fixed by communication. Then we have Damian Crawford, right? His focus was on empowering families and providing education. And you hear them telling plain, say, picnic can't vote, and education can't yam. Now, in a situation, he's going to focus on power and try to consolidate. So I gave you two examples there. So you kind of have to empathize where they are concerned in trying to make the move of giving away sure for unsure. So we do understand the situation which exists. Man in the red cap, sorry.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. All right, the issue on voter apathy. You know, when I speak to a person who has literacy challenges and they say, "You now vote," you know, I can understand because they don't know what is other suffrage, never heard the word before, and kind of that. But when I speak to a university student, because I'm a campus police, so I am here, and they say to me, "Mr. Hastings, you know, you never vote yet, or you now vote, I will not vote." I am puzzled because this is an institution that is supposed to enlighten the students. So, and then it was confirmed by Mr. Gordon and Dr. Satchel, Satchel, right, who somehow endorsed the flawed narrative that, well, you know, it is the politicians' fault, the party's fault, and so on. They are supposed to debunk the myth because that's what you are there for, to offer guidance. Voting represents infinite power. Infinite power must not be trifled with. And you're supposed to lead the charge to when they graduate, they can lessen the alarmingly high numbers of uncommitted voters. Here's a young man who was sitting there, and he's saying that, well, he followed the politics, and he sees that there are issues, but rather than trying to find solutions, call the parties, go to their meetings, have a discussion, he stays on the fence and say, well, you know, their problem, they must fix it, and I will not vote. Right? It just shows a failure on the part of the educators. And you know, FSS is one of the faculties that zeroes on governance. And they should lead the charge in addressing the issue of voter apathy through their graduates. As it now stands, the finished product needs to be recalled because, you know, it can't be that you have graduates who are telling that they will not vote and they are graduates. None of the panelists mentioned a defining period. Senator Golden spoke about connectedness to the system, the parliament. In the 1970s was a time when the proletariat, the masses, felt for the first time at last to belong to their country under the brilliant stewardship of the late great Michael Manley. And in those days, those heydays, voting was in the high 80s, right? And that's because of participatory democracy at its highest. Regrettably, through the years, there have been deviations, right? But there was a time when people believed in the system and were committed to play a pivotal part. Ms. Archer, indeed, the civic that you mentioned, that really grounded me, civics. And it is profoundly disappointing when Mr. Gordon mentioned that there should be an incentive for a citizen to be patriotic. I was wondering what I was hearing. I was hoping that, he somehow made an error. But from you're born, you're born, that should be inherent, a part of you. I mean, no incentive. Patriotism must be unconditional. Unconditional. The young people of today, the so-called millennium, they want to graduate today and get a big house, big car tomorrow. That is bordering on insanity. Our economy cannot sustain that. Cannot sustain that. It just cannot sustain that.
Yeah, let me just respond because I was singled out several times. I feel obliged to respond. All right, so I also tell my students that political participation is not limited to voting. So you say students are interested in going on social media and voicing their concern. That is a part of political participation. And for many young people, they believe that that is a more effective means of political participation than voting because that actually leads to more engagement, leads to more conversation. I also want to say too that in a democracy, you have the right to vote or not to vote. You're not entitled to a vote. A vote is something that you earn. And I believe that people should not vote out of a sense of duty, but your voting must be informed. It must be deliberative. And the political parties have a responsibility of earning the vote and meeting the expectations of voters. So the voter apathy, convincing voters to vote, is a direct responsibility of the political parties, right? They have to articulate those policies that are aligned with the expectations and needs of voters. Voters are not obligated to go and vote for a political party just for voting's sake. You have to convince those voters that I am making the right choice by voting for you because I have particular needs, I have particular expectations, and you have articulated policy positions that show me that you understand and you're serious about meeting those expectations. You can't send mixed signals to voters. You can't engage in patterns of behavior that are inconsistent with voters' expectations of decency, civility, and exemplary conduct, and then say, you must vote for me. Why should I vote for you when it is not consistent with my interests based on what you have demonstrated to me as political parties and candidates? So I want to be clear about that. Political participation is not limited to voting. So all the things that the young people do on social media and how they engage with each other, that's also a part of political participation. And we encourage them to extend this idea of political participation beyond voting to all the other various fora and mechanisms of political participation, and that include the one that you're not very fond of. But this is how many young people relate with each other and interact with each other and share ideas and engage in meaningful discourse. Yes?
Thank you very much. We're at the end of the we're at the end of our very, very, very interesting discussion. I think we could have been here all night, and that was the reason why we had to manage the numbers and the size, because it can be a very controversial conversation, and we can have us talking, and it will have us talking. We have some refreshments at the back, so for those of you who were not able to ask a question, we have the panelists. I don't know if the senators will be here for a bit to interact. Okay, fantastic. All right, so thank you everyone for coming. We will make sure that the data is available on the SALISES website. We are currently working on an AI called Sally that will share and generate all of this information in a very user-friendly way. So hopefully by the beginning of the semester, we should have her up and running. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for coming. Bye.